I want to take you somewhere most people run from. Not the mountaintop, not the temple, but the void. The space where light doesn't reach, where your demons whisper louder than your affirmations, where your masks fall off one by one and all that's left is you. Not the curated version, not the spiritual identity, the raw, trembling soul underneath it all. If you've been called a chosen one, you've been sold a lie, that your power comes from your light, that your compassion, your peace, your love is what makes you divine. But I'm here to shatter that illusion. Because the real ones, the ones who carry the ancient frequency, the ones who were chosen long before this life, they are not made of light. They are sculpted from darkness. And if you are one of them, your journey didn't begin with enlightenment. It began with suffering. I'm not talking about the kind of suffering you can share easily. I'm talking about the kind that makes you question if you're cursed, the kind that shows up in patterns you can't break, addictions you can't explain, emptiness that no success can fill. You see, the chosen ones don't wake up in the light. They wake up in ruin, in chaos, in silence so loud it breaks timelines. And it's within that darkness, your darkest moments, your lowest states, that something begins to stir. Not something pretty, not something easy, something old, something fierce, something that says, this isn't the end. This is the activation. Have you ever wondered why you felt things more deeply than others? Why your pain seems disproportionate? Why you carry wounds that don't make sense in this lifetime? That's not weakness. That's weight, soul weight. You're carrying codes, contracts, karmic threads that go far beyond what this world can see. And here's the catch. The universe didn't choose you because you are strong. It chose you because you were willing to go where others won't, willing to confront your darkness instead of bypassing it, willing to walk through hell and not become it. That's where your power lies, not in your perfection, but in your pain, but only if you own it. Most people try to escape the dark. They distract, they deny, they dress it up in light language. But the chosen ones, we descend, we go deeper, because we know that the only way out is through the betrayal, through the abandonment, through the rage and grief and madness that the world pretends doesn't exist. We don't skip steps, we feel it all, and that's what makes us powerful. Because the shadow you integrate becomes the strength you radiate. The wound you accept becomes the wisdom you transmit. You don't shine because you avoided the dark. You shine because you merged with it. Let me ask you something deep. What part of you have you been told to hide? What emotion have you buried so deeply that it's now running your life from the shadows? What if that part is not your flaw, but your key? Because until you face it, you are owned by it. It becomes your unconscious compass. You start living a life that looks successful but feels hollow. You start attracting situations that trigger you, not because you're cursed, but because you're being called back to the place of your power. And that place is never found in surface level light. It's found in your darkness, in the pain you've been afraid to feel, in the truth you've been afraid to admit. That's where your real journey begins. And when you finally stop running, when you sit in that darkness long enough to hear its voice, you realize something wild. It was never your enemy. It was your teacher. Your initiator, your sacred guide. The darkness didn't come to destroy you. It came to strip away the illusion of who you're not. And what's left when it's done? Not a sanitized version of divinity, not a pretty, polished guru, but a warrior of truth, a being who has seen every part of themselves and still chooses to show up. That's the kind of power the world can't fake. That's the kind of energy that breaks spells, shifts rooms, dissolves illusions. And you don't get that from love and light alone. You get it from walking barefoot through your own fire, again and again, until the flames recognize you. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey where everything collapses. Not just the outer life, relationships, careers, identities, but the inner scaffolding, the beliefs that held you together, the spiritual masks you outgrew, the illusions you were taught to accept. And when that moment comes, it doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like death. A slow, unglamorous unraveling of everything you thought was real. But this is the sacred rebellion. The moment you stop worshiping false light and start reclaiming your truth. Because before the chosen ones can build anything sacred, they must first burn the imitation to the ground. We were never meant to follow the rules of a broken world. We were never meant to fit into systems built on fear, shame, and performance. But we tried. We tried so hard. We played the roles. We said what they wanted to hear. We dimmed our fire to make others feel safe. And all the while, something inside us screamed. Not in anger, but in remembrance. A voice that said, "This isn't it. This isn't who you are." And that voice, faint at first, starts to grow louder the more you suffer, until it becomes impossible to ignore. That's the divine rebellion. The moment you stop trying to be who the world wants and start becoming who your soul remembers. But here's the paradox. To find your truth, you must first confront your lies. Every illusion you've been wearing like armor. Every belief that kept you small. Every identity that was rewarded by society but rejected by your spirit. The chosen ones don't just wake up with clarity. They have to lose everything that isn't theirs. And that loss is brutal. It takes away your comfort, your certainty, your false sense of safety. But it also gives you something far more powerful: freedom. And that freedom is earned, not gifted. You earn it by being willing to question everything, even your own spiritual narrative. Have you ever asked yourself, what if the light I've been chasing is just another prison? What if the version of goodness I've been taught to embody is a weapon of control? Because let's be honest, most of us were taught that to be spiritual, we had to be agreeable, nice, always forgiving, always selfless. But that's not truth. That's conditioning. Real light doesn't come from suppression. It comes from integration, from bringing all parts of you, yes, even the angry, messy, wild parts, into sacred alignment. Anything less isn't light. It's performance. And the chosen ones didn't come to perform. We came to disrupt. That's why your darkness is so important. It's not something to fix. It's something to understand. Your rage. It's the fire of a soul that remembers freedom. Your sadness. It's the grief of lifetimes where you were silenced. Your pride. It's the armor you build to protect your sensitivity. These aren't flaws. These are codes. And when you stop judging them, they start revealing their wisdom. This is the sacred alchemy of the chosen ones. We don't run from the shadow. We listen to it. We dance with it. We learn how to wield it. And that's where our power becomes unshakable. But be warned, this path will cost you. Not your soul, but your illusions. You will lose people. You will lose praise. You will lose the version of yourself that was never real to begin with. And it hurts. It feels like exile, like being cast out from the tribe. But in that exile, you begin to find your real people. The ones who see your darkness and don't flinch. The ones who don't need you to be light all the time because they've met their own shadows too. These are your soul allies, and you won't find them until you first learn to stand alone. That's the test. Can you stand in your truth even when it costs you everything? Because that's what makes you dangerous to the system and sacred to the mission. And when you pass that test, when you no longer fear your own power, something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to be light and you become whole. And wholeness is far more powerful than purity. Wholeness allows you to walk into any room and feel no need to shrink or perform. Wholeness allows you to speak with authority, not because you're better, but because you're anchored. You don't seek approval. You transmit truth, and that truth is rooted not in light alone, but in the dark soil of your deepest becoming. That's what makes chosen ones powerful. Not the light they show, but the darkness they've survived. There comes a moment when the darkness no longer consumes you, but becomes your compass. It no longer drags you down, it grounds you. You stop fearing the storm because you realize you are the storm. This is the final transmutation. When all the trauma, all the pain, all the buried rage and shame and grief gets reclaimed as power. You don't just survive your past, you alchemize it. You don't just heal, you wield. And it's not through pretending it didn't happen. It's through owning that it did. That you walked through fire and came out with flames in your eyes, not to destroy, but to illuminate. This is when the chosen ones become dangerous, not to the innocent, but to the systems of illusion. Because now your pain is no longer a wound. It's a weapon of clarity. You can see through manipulation. You can feel lies in the vibration of someone's voice. You can walk into a space and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. Because the darkness taught you how to listen to what most people can't even tolerate. It taught you how to sit with the unbearable and not break. And now, that stillness becomes your sharpest tool. You don't react, you respond. You don't chase, you attract. You don't perform, you embody. And the most beautiful part, you stop needing to explain yourself. You stop over-explaining your pain to people who will never understand it. You stop seeking validation from those who were never meant to see you. Because you realize your journey was never meant to be understood by the many. It was meant to awaken the few, the ones who feel your frequency in their bones. The ones who hear your silence louder than words. The ones who are also carrying ancient codes inside their suffering, just waiting to be unlocked. When you walk in your integrated power, you don't need to be seen to shine. Your presence remembers people to themselves. But this level of power requires one final sacrifice. You must let go of the story that you were broken. You must release the identity of the struggler, the victim, even the healer. It served you, it protected you, but it's not who you are. You're not here to endlessly fix yourself. You're here to transmit wholeness, not perfection, but presence. That means stepping into a new archetype, not the wounded seeker, but the embodied initiator. The one who doesn't just talk about healing, but becomes the portal through which healing happens. And that happens not through light, but through resonance, through frequency, through truth. So ask yourself now, how much longer will you pretend you are powerless? How much longer will you wait for permission to be who you already are? The darkness didn't come for your destruction. It came to strip away the illusion of your smallness. And now that it's gone, what do you have left? Not a perfect being, but a sacred weapon. a soul with scars that shine like runes, a heart that has been cracked open so wide that compassion flows out like fire. Not gentle, not always soft, but real, undeniable, holy. And here's where the chosen ones become truly unstoppable, when they realize their light doesn't need to be protected. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need to be earned. It just needs to be owned. You don't have to be healed to be powerful. You have to be honest. You have to be present. You have to be willing to be seen as both divine and human, to be magnificent and messy, to be both the sword and the wound. Because when people feel that kind of wholeness, they don't just admire you, they remember themselves through you. And that's the mission, isn't it? Not to be followed, but to awaken. Not to be idolized, but to ignite. The chosen ones aren't here to create followers. We're here to create remembrances, to walk into rooms and activate souls who forgot they were powerful, to speak truth so sharp it cuts through centuries of silence, to hold space so deep that others finally feel safe enough to fall apart and rebuild. That's what makes your darkness sacred. Because it taught you how to hold others in theirs. You don't just know the path, you are the path. So now I ask you, what are you still hiding? What would happen if you stopped apologizing for your scars? What if your pain wasn't a secret to be ashamed of, but a prophecy to be fulfilled? You didn't go through all that to become quiet. You didn't survive that much to blend in. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be legendary. And that legend isn't written in light alone. It's carved in shadow. It's etched in blood and memory. It's held in the frequency of a soul who remembers who they were before the world told them who to be. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling this frequency in your chest, then you already know this wasn't just a video. This was a mirror, a sacred reminder of something you've always carried, even when you forgot, especially when you forgot. Because the chosen ones don't need more knowledge. We need remembrance. We need to remember that our power never came from escaping the dark. It came from walking with it, dancing with it, letting it teach us how to see in ways others are still afraid to look. You didn't come here to be saved. You came here to remember that you were the one holding the key all along. And that key, it was forged in the fire of your own undoing. You might be wondering, what now? Now that I've faced all this truth, all this shadow, all this buried power, what do I do with it? And here's the answer. You live it. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because you can't not. You embody your depth without needing others to validate it. You speak when silence feels like betrayal. You stay when it would be easier to run. You create when the world says it's not ready. Because the chosen ones are never here to wait for permission. We're here to build what's never been built, to say what's never been said, to become what has always been forgotten. And that kind of becoming, it's not a destination, it's a daily devotion. This is why your darkness matters. Because it taught you how to be real. It stripped away the fantasy of being good and gave you the gift of being true. It showed you that your vulnerability isn't weakness, it's voltage. That your sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's a superpower. And now as you walk forward, more fractured and more whole than you've ever been, you carry something no one can take from you. Embodied wisdom. Not just the kind you read in books or heard in teachings. The kind that bled through your skin and burned through your soul until it became part of your DNA. That's what makes you untouchable. Not immunity from pain, but intimacy with it. You become the person others come to when their world collapses. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've been there. You've sat in the fire and didn't flinch. You've walked through the void and didn't lose yourself. You faced the shadow and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." That's what people feel when they're near you. Not perfection, not authority, but safety. Sacred presence, the unspoken understanding that says, "You don't have to pretend here. I've met your pain. I've met my own, and I still choose love." That's what changes people. That's what shifts collectives. That's what reroutes destinies. So no, the chosen ones aren't powerful because of their light. That's the illusion. They're powerful because they remembered their darkness, because they stopped rejecting the very thing that made them divine, because they learned how to sit in the silence, in the madness, in the exile, and still hear the call. And now that you've heard it, what will you do with it? Will you go back to sleep? Or will you rise not as a savior, not as a saint, but as a soul who is finally whole?